Good evening all and welcome. I come to you tonight with a special plea before we check into our haunted hotels. If anything creepy or sinister has ever happened to you and you would like to share it with me, as many of you have alluded to in the comments, please email me, themortismedia@gmail.com. Email can be found down below. I really would love to get more of your stories in. Who knows, maybe I can have whole subscriber special episodes. That'd be fun. But for now, your room is ready, so let's check in, get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. My husband and I trade off planning our anniversaries, and sometimes we do themed trips. A few years ago it was his turn to organize, and he picked a winner. You see, ever since I was a kid, I've experienced odd things, but being very scientific, I like to investigate such things in my own way. He is a scientist who loves Halloween. We get along in that way. When he told me we were going to have a ghost-themed anniversary, I was stoked. We stayed at the Queen Anne Hotel in San Francisco, which is renowned for being haunted. One room in particular, 314, was the most active, and this was the room my husband had booked. The hotel was originally built for Mary Lake as a girls' school called Lake Seminary. As the name suggests, it's a large, beautiful Victorian building. The haunted room was supposed to have been the headmistress's Lake office. I knew from research and YouTube videos that people often reported objects moving, voices of a woman, orbs and stuff like that. I'd also heard it was pretty reliable, one of those rare spots where most groups at least catch some whiff of activity. The kind of thing that always makes my skeptic brain go nuts, because I start to wonder if it's faked, or perhaps psychological, and I just want to get in there, roll up my sleeves and see for myself. I bought my standard kit, a digital recorder, camera, infrared thermometer, EMF reader, and a bunch of other random equipment. We were there for part of the afternoon, taking measurements and wandering around, trying to get a feel for the place. I laid out some trigger objects, which are supposed to be things that a ghost might like to move. Everyone thought the spirit was the original headmistress, so I put out cosmetics, brushes, perfume, things that might remind a woman of her life. We went out to meet a haunted tour of the city, and I left everything set up. Turned out the haunted tour stopped by our hotel and gave a brief rundown of the hotel and the room. I raised my hand and said, "I'm renting that room if anyone wants to go in." The tour guide was overjoyed they'd have access to the room, and took us to it. As we walked in, I turned on the lights. The guide was going on about how people often see things through their phones and cameras that they wouldn't see with their eyes. I thought, wow, how cool, and took out my phone. I lifted it to take a picture, and in that split second, I saw a weird grey ball shoot across the screen. The guide who was standing behind me said, "Oh my god, did you catch it?" Sadly, I didn't hit the button fast enough, so there was no picture. I've never been a huge fan of orbs because I know what dust can do to light refraction, but this was a massive grey ball. It didn't glow. It moved past the screen as tangible as a tennis ball. Though I've toyed with my iPhone to duplicate it, I simply can't. That was no dust. After the tour, we headed back to the hotel, lying in bed. I did some EVP stuff and sat there staring at my instruments until I was exhausted. My husband had already gone to sleep, and I finally decided to call it a night. On either side of the bed were massive wrought iron and marble-topped side tables, each about 2 feet square. They're sturdy and don't move, and both have a single, large metal lamp on them. The power outlet was on my side on the wall about 2 feet away, and my husband had already plugged in his phone. His phone was in a slick plastic case. My phone, however, had a thick, rubber, non-stick otter case on it, because I'm always dropping the damn thing. I plugged my phone in and set it right beside his on the corner table. Both phones had plenty of slack in their cords and were a few inches from the edge. I turned out the light and laid down. I was laying there for about 10 seconds when I remembered I'd forgotten to check our reservation for a tour the next day. I sat back up, turned on the light, and reached for my phone. But it wasn't there. My husband's phone was there. Mine was gone. I looked around utterly confused and to my surprise found my phone lying on the ground about 4 feet away, still plugged in, resting upright against the baseboard. I froze and got goosebumps all over my body, because I realized there was no way it could have fallen without me hearing it. It would have hit the ground and have to have bounced up in the first place, finally hitting the wall. How could it have slipped off in its non-stick case while my husband's phone, in the exact same configuration, was still there, and for it to be flat against the wall? Impossible. I couldn't even throw it and make it do that. It was as if someone had picked it up, walked it over there, and gently set it in place without making a single sound. I elbowed my husband so he sat bolt upright, and I hurriedly told him what happened as he sat there bleary-eyed and confused. When I pointed at the phone, and he saw what I saw, he very dutifully asked me if I wanted to switch sides of the bed. He's a good man, my husband. I practically jumped across the bed, and was still covered in goosebumps, and felt like I had ice in my veins. I was physically shaking, so he bundled and wrapped me up in blankets and held me tight. We had been cuddled together, him falling back asleep and me thinking, how the hell am I going to sleep tonight? For about 30 seconds, when I kid you not, plain as day, from the space between the bed and the power outlet, we heard a little girl giggle and say, "Hello?" I jolted and felt my husband's whole body startle. After a few seconds, I tilted my head and he whispered, "I heard it too." I didn't sleep that night. The hotel did not disappoint. Wandering around, we had a few more odd things happen. Once, while we were sitting in an old church pew at the end of a corridor, the window on the hall slammed open, but no one was there. In our last hour there, we were sitting on the second-floor landing beside the elevator with our recording devices, and my husband said, "Well, should we head out?" I agreed. We stood up, and with a little bing, the elevator opened for us. The trouble is, the elevators don't arrive at a floor unless they've been called, and not a soul had gone past to do such a thing. We went to the front desk right away, thinking the clerk had heard us talking and had sent the elevator up by getting in it, hitting the button for the second floor, and exiting it. "Thank you for doing that," I said, and she looked at me as if I'd grown a third arm and said, "What?" I told her the elevator had opened for us and thought she'd sent it up, but she shook her head. "You saw me. I was in the back when you came out here. I've been doing paperwork in there for an hour. No one's come in or out in over an hour." When I got home, I dove into analyzing the recordings I'd made and doing research. I found it odd that I hadn't found anyone who thought the hauntings might be a girl. Everyone said it was a woman, but it was a girls' school, and sometimes children did pass away at that time from diseases, especially in the 1880s. I tried to find anyone who died while attending the seminary but had no luck. On the first evening when I'd set up the room and everything, I had been sitting on the bed, talking to the recorder while my husband got ready to leave for the haunted tour. I had put the digital recorder dead center on the bed because it was pretty stable, and thought the blanket might help dampen random street noise which you could just barely hear. I was trying to explain what the digital recorder was, but in a way I felt would be understandable to someone from the 1800s, because no one ever does that on television, and it annoys the crap of me. How is a person who died in 1755 supposed to know what the word recording, play, or playback means? For them, they have very different contexts. So I was picking my words carefully. I said, "This tiny metal box here is a machine. It can hear things I can't, like a gramophone or a phonographic cylinder. It can transcribe noise, voices, and words, so that even if I can't hear you, I can check the recording later, and it will play me everything that it hears, so you can speak if you want, and even if I can't hear you now, I'll be able to hear you later." At that exact moment, very loudly, as if they were closer to the device than I was, a female voice said, "Ah," in that excited or enlightened way that indicates understanding. It was the only recording of an EVP that happened in the first 30 minutes we were there. After that moment, we were basically followed around, and every crazy thing the ghosts could manage, it did. I just wish I had the video camera instead of a still camera that night, so I could have captured the foam being moved and the little girl laughing. That was seriously the coolest and most unexplainable thing I've gone through with another person there to witness it. My husband wants to go back, but I'm not so sure. So if you ever get to stay in room 314 of the Queen Anne, don't plan on sleeping. There was something off about our journey from the beginning. Looking back, I completely ignored my intuition, but the universe was flashing massive warning signs to stay away. We originally booked through Priceline. The next morning, the hotel called us directly stating they were overbooked and could not honor the room. They offered us a larger room at a higher rate, and we accepted. But trying to cancel the original Priceline reservation turned into hours of frustrating customer service battles that almost made us call off the trip entirely. After hours of fighting to get it sorted, we finally hit the road. The exact moment we drove across the town line into Bisbee, our car radio randomly switched on its own to a strange, old-timey vintage station. A song immediately came on about a woman hanging herself that was our welcome to town. When we finally showed up at the hotel, the front desk told us that our reservation was completely cancelled, and there was no room for us. We explained that we had spoken to the manager personally. By pure luck, the manager was on her way out, and we flagged her down, and at the last second, manually confirmed our stay. And we finally unlocked the door to room 209. It was Mad Hatter weekend in Bisbee, so the town was filled with a surreal energy and people walking about in bizarre costumes, waiting for a mock beheading. We headed out into town, stopping at the Grand Bisbee Hotel for bar and drinks, and then went down the street for more drinks and some wings. We met some interesting people, and the night continued in a bit of a blur. On our way back to the hotel, feeling good, my girlfriend brought up the idea of doing a séance in our room. I thought it was a fantastic idea, and we started walking back. Right across the street from the hotel, my girlfriend suddenly tripped and fell hard into the pavement. A police officer sitting next to his cruiser immediately tried to stop me from walking across as I tried to process what was happening and engage with someone walking towards me in a stupor. When I got to her, the sight was overwhelming. She was crying, bruised and bleeding from her upper lip, and her front teeth were chipped from hitting the street. The intense guilt of failing to be the protector I pride myself on, mixed with the shock of the situation, turned into a massive, burning internal anger. We got back to the room. She didn't want medical help, but she was crying, exhausted, and just wanted to leave. Because we had been drinking, and we had to wait for it to wear off, she eventually fell asleep. Furious and restless, I went out into the hotel halls alone. I was so upset by the situation that I started openly cursing and yelling out to the spirits, daring them to try and do something. I went floor by floor, looking to feel frightened because I felt so intensely strong and confrontational. What completely surprised me was that even though the hotel was completely packed that weekend, absolutely no one opened a door or came out to see what the noise was while I was yelling in the halls. I made my way down to the bottom floor, which was completely dark and filled with old furniture. As I stood there, I heard a faint, slight moaning sound. At first, my logical brain tried to process it, assuming it was just guests getting busy in a nearby room. But as I moved towards the front doors, the moaning sound actively changed direction and started getting closer to me. Suddenly, an intense, overwhelming wave of panic swarmed my entire body. My survival instinct kicked in, screaming at me that I needed to get back upstairs immediately. It felt as if something had literally run right up on me. I ran to the second floor and sat down in the well-lit hallway and tried to process what had just happened. While I was sitting there, a gentleman walked right past me without acknowledging my presence at all. A few minutes later, a woman walked past and went up to the next level, also completely failing to notice me sitting right there in the open. I finally went back into the hotel room, checked on my girlfriend, and fell asleep. The morning after, when we woke up, we were jarred to find a little dresser in our room had been completely moved and opened while we slept. But the final chill hit us as we packed up our things to check out. As I looked around the ground floor where I had been chased by the sound the night before, I realized a fact that blew my logical processing apart. There are no guest rooms in the bottom floor. It is strictly the empty front desk, lobby, old furniture, and the saloon. The sound hadn't been a guest next door. It was entirely displaced in an empty dark hall. So, my question to you, has anyone else stayed in room 209 at the Copper Queen or experienced auditory anomalies on the ground floor late at night? This happened over 15 years ago, and the memory still lives clear as day in my head. It took me about 6 years to tell anyone what I saw, because I was afraid it would come back if I spoke of it. I was staying with my parents at a hotel in South Florida with a friend of mine. We had a Pop Warner football jamboree the next day. I wouldn't call it so much of a hotel, more like a days in. Have you ever had that feeling that something is watching you, or trying to get your attention without making any sound? This feeling was so intense and hit my gut so hard it made me nervous. And that's not woke me up out of a dead sleep at around 3 or 4 a.m. I sat up in bed and immediately got that awkward, uneasy feeling, which prompted me to look around the room, where I saw my parents sleeping in the bed closest to the entrance. My friend and I were on the bed closest to the window, and the only light in the room was coming from the alarm clock and the small crack under the door that led to the main hallway. So while I was looking around, I kept getting drawn to the window next to my bed. It looked open because the curtains were moving, but this was a window that could not be opened. About 15 seconds went by and I couldn't stop staring at it. I became so nervous and worried for some reason and was convinced that something bad was going to happen. It was kind of like the feeling you get right before going on a scary ride for the first time, but this was much worse. Then, out of nowhere, this object appeared at the window. Keep in mind that we're 4 floors up, so it's hard to describe the figure, but the best way I can describe it is a bit like the Grim Reaper. At that moment I knew nothing about that concept, but if I had to compare it to anything, that would be it. It was cloudy but still very realistic in shape. It was taller than a grown man, and it didn't have a scythe, just itself. The feeling I got from it is something I'll never forget. As it came slowly into the room, it made its way in front of my bed. Then it stopped. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It was still facing the door entrance to our room, and I could sense it knew I was watching it, or could see me. About 6 seconds went by, then it slowly turned its covered head towards me. As it was turning, I got out of bed, pulled the blanket off and hid underneath it. I just waited. I was so young and unaware of the worst-case scenario, like being dragged from under the bed and taken away from my parents. Nothing happened. I just waited there until the sun came up and my parents asked me what I was doing on the floor. My friends always ask me, "Why didn't you scream or yell for your parents?" and I always tell them that this thing brought so much fear into me that I couldn't even begin to comprehend what was happening. I was completely terrified, and I didn't speak about it for more than 6 years. I only started talking about it after another friend of mine shared a pretty interesting story of their own. Since then, nothing has happened, but I wanted to share my story in the hopes that someone else may have had something similar. I've had sleep paralysis before, and I know it wasn't that because I was moving, and I've never sleepwalked before, and it wasn't a dream because I never fell back asleep. My parents owned a tavern and restaurant in my small town for 14 years, which burnt down last week, which triggered my need to share this. Now, my dad is someone who always wants to start new projects. He's pretty well known for it around town, actually, and one day he was contracted by the local realtor who offered him a private showing of a historical hotel that had just been put up for sale. The hotel had been around for decades, and over the years it had tried being a hotel, then a restaurant, and then a bar with little success. Every owner who had taken it on ended up putting it back on the market within a year. At this point, the bank held the title, and the realtor told my dad, if you don't buy it and fix it up, they plan on ripping it down. A lot of people in town believed the only person who could save the hotel was my father, so he decided to buy it. My parents kept the downstairs as a bar and renovated the upstairs into apartments, and that's when the odd things started happening. My father would come home almost every night with camera footage to show my mum and me. The footage always showed the same empty pool room, but in the foreground there were small random orbs floating around. My dad is a believer in the paranormal, but my mum is not, so she and I both chalked it up to bugs and dust. I'll admit though, the way the orbs zigzagged around the room was strange. Still, we tried to treat it as if it were nothing. About a month went by, and one Sunday my dad came home early from working at the hotel, and he looked spooked, which is something my dad rarely is. He explained that he was behind the bar going over receipts from the night before, when he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway entrance. We don't open on Sundays, but if someone my dad knew saw his truck in the parking lot, they'd just walk in to see him, so he didn't think the footsteps at first were odd at all. Without looking up from the receipts, he called out, "We aren't open, but give me a moment." He heard the footsteps enter the bar room, take 6 more steps towards him, and then stop. He took another second to finish going over last night's shift, and then looked up and peered around the wooden support beam. But there was no one there. He said he got out of there so fast, he doesn't even remember locking the door behind him. My mom obviously thought he was overreacting, but me? I was freaked out. The place had always given me the creeps, but hearing my dad confirm my fears made me never want to set foot in that building again. Then 2 days ago, my mum had an experience there that sent her out of the door faster still. She was in the barroom before opening hours, collecting the shift money from the night before. She hadn't been in there for more than 5 minutes when she started hearing the faint sound of music coming from the entrance hallway. She said she ignored it at first, assuming it was one of the tenants upstairs, and after collecting the money she went to leave, and the music began getting louder. She said it sounded like old waltz music, piano-based, and played cleanly. The further she walked down the hall towards the bathrooms, the more prominent the noises became. When she stepped in front of the women's restroom, it sounded like someone was inside playing the music from their phone. My mum was at this point thoroughly freaked out, and had run out of rational explanations for what it could be. Just as she was about to open the door, she said she heard the water turn on and off twice, then she ran out of the building. In the parking lot, she called my dad to come down, certain someone had been in there with her. When he came down to check it out, no one was there. Now, my mum is a believer and both of us are properly terrified of that old creepy hotel. But it's gone now. Here are some of my experiences that I genuinely cannot explain. The first one happened about 2 years ago. I was meeting my friend under my void deck. For context, I'm from Singapore. HBD stands for Housing and Development Board, which is basically public housing, and the void deck is the open space on the ground floor. That day, there was a Chinese funeral happening under my block. It must have been around 5 p.m, and I was coming back from school to meet my friend. I texted him, asking him where he was, and he said he was already waiting under my block. So I went around looking for him but couldn't find him. I texted him again, jokingly asked, "Where are you? In the coffin?" because of the funeral. He laughed, I laughed, and eventually we met up and hung out like normal. Nothing strange happened after that. I went home, did my usual routine, and went to sleep around 2 a.m. since I had work the next day. While lying in bed, fully awake, I suddenly heard a woman singing. Not from my room, not from outside the window. It felt like it was right in my ear. I honestly cannot scientifically explain it. It was an old Hokkien Chinese song and maybe lasted about 8 seconds before stopping completely. There was no music playing, no TV or background noise. The house was extremely quiet, and it felt really eerie. Only after that did I remember the joke I had made earlier about my friend being in the coffin under my block, and that connection freaked me out. This happened 2 years ago, and to this day, I can't explain it. I'm pretty sure it's not mental related since I don't have any diagnosed conditions. This second story happened recently about 2 days ago when I was in Batam. I stayed there for about 3 days, and this happened on the first day. I stayed at the Aston Inn Gideon Hotel. It was a nice place with free breakfast and friendly staff. Nothing felt spooky at all. I went there on a Friday, which matters because mosques usually do prayers and chanting at night. Around 7 p.m, my friends wanted to go out drinking, but I was tired and lazy, so I stayed back at the hotel to rest. The room was a connecting room. 2 rooms joined together with connecting doors inside. Both of those doors were wide open. Around 8 p.m, I was watching Singles Inferno Season 5 on Netflix and everything felt normal. The mosque prayers started and then ended, and I didn't think much of it. After that, I looked at the mirror and noticed the shadow of the bathroom door moving, like it was slowly opening and closing. There was no wind at all except for the aircon, and the aircon was facing my direction, not the bathroom. I panicked and called my friends, asking where they were and when they were coming back. While on the call, I looked at the mirror again and saw the door shadow still moving slowly. I didn't even dare turn my head. And that was when I heard the sound of running water, and I screamed. My friends heard it through the call and thought I was being dramatic and hung up on me. But I stayed frozen on the bed, vaping to calm myself down. After about 15 minutes, nothing else happened. I finally got up and checked the bathroom and noticed the towel hanging near the mirror was moving slightly. That's when I realized I scared myself. The water running sound was probably the aircon engine, and the floor movement was just airflow. I had clearly overthought everything. But this is the part I truly cannot explain. I went back to bed and remembered my phone was charging near the TV, and so I walked over to pick it up. As I was doing that, from the corner of my left eye, I saw something. It looked like an invisible force shaped like a human, floating and see-through and running towards me. I screamed again and turned fully to look, but there was nothing there. I know how it sounds. I don't even really believe in ghosts, but I experienced it, and I still don't know how to explain it. I work as a receptionist at a hotel at night, and I've never seen anything, but I have heard noises. Here are a list of my experiences. The first. The sound of plants moving in the living room, even when everything appears completely still, usually happens late at night, when the place is quiet, and there's no airflow that could explain it. So picture it, I'll be sitting at the desk or walking by, and I can clearly hear the leaves brushing up against each other, as if someone is running their hand through them or shifting them around. The first few times, I assumed it was just a draft or maybe my imagination, filling in gaps in the silence. But every time I turn on the lights and look directly at them, nothing is moving, not even slightly. The leaves remain perfectly still. Behind my reception desk, there's a small office area. Inside, there's a computer and keyboard that almost never gets used, especially at night while I'm working. Well, on multiple occasions, when everything's dead quiet, I've heard the very distinct sound of typing coming from that room. The first time it happened, I walked in, expecting to find somebody there, perhaps a coworker, and I hadn't noticed. But the room was empty. There would be nothing on the screen. And the sound has returned more than once, and it always happens when I'm alone, with no one there to be doing the typing. There was another occasion, sometime between 3 to 4 a.m., I received 4 phone calls from one of the rooms that was completely unoccupied. The first call caught me off guard, but I answered it normally, assuming there must be an issue with the system. All I heard on the other end was a ringing sound like the call hadn't actually connected properly. Then it hung up. A few minutes later, it rang again from the same room. I answered to the same result. This happened 4 times in total, each call spaced just enough apart to sort of freak me out. After the 4th time, it no longer called. I checked the room later personally, and there was nothing wrong with it. It was empty. There was also another recurring sound that comes from a small dessert display case we have. It has a latch on the back that makes a very specific noise when it's opened or closed, and I'm very familiar with the noise from daily use. On a few nights, I've clearly heard that exact latch being lifted and the case being opened, as if someone were taking something out or placing something inside. The sound is unmistakable, but every time I check, the case is closed properly. Nothing is out of place, and there's no sign that anyone has touched it. Another incident tied to the same room I mentioned earlier, the one that made the phone calls. Well, one night, I was trying to track down a water leak and had to go room by room checking everything. When I reached that particular room, I inspected it carefully but couldn't find any issues. Everything looked normal. As I stepped out and reached to close the door behind me, I suddenly heard a loud bang from inside, like something had exploded or been thrown. It made me jump. So I opened the door and saw that the closet door inside the room had swung wide open. It hadn't been that way when I checked just moments before. It looked like it had been ripped open from the inside. There was another point, again involving that same room, as I approached it with my walkie-talkie on. As I got closer, the device suddenly lit up, showing that it was receiving a signal. Then, clear as anything, I heard a female voice come through saying, "Hello." Just that one word. Then the light shut off and the signal was gone. I didn't respond, and nothing else came through after that. The same night as the walkie-talkie incident, something else happened. I was in a room about 3 meters away from that same weird room, and it really does deserve that label at this point. On top of one of the beds, I found a key card placed neatly where it would be immediately noticeable. Each room has its own assigned card, and out of all the cards in the hotel, the one I found belonged to that specific room. There was no reason for it to be there. I remember standing there for a moment just looking at it and thinking, maybe it wants me to go back. So I did go back and checked the room again, but this time nothing happened and everything remained quiet. These have been my experiences working at the hotel. I can honestly say I've rarely felt any real fear from it. It's more of a mix of curiosity and unease. I try not to give it more importance than necessary. For context, we are a brown, big, joined family living in one home, and this happened 3 years ago. My family and I went on a short staycation at a hotel in our own city. We ordered an extra bed for my sister, and things started becoming weird after that. The bathroom door in our room would only open if pushed really hard from outside, as if someone was inside and locked the door. Throughout the day, random knocks were heard from the walls, even the table. It was really bizarre. Everyone felt uneasy, but we decided to stay the night since we had already paid. We complained to reception. They sent staff to check, but there was no construction nearby and no one staying in the rooms next to us. Nothing explained the noises. During the night, I slept, but my cousins claimed they heard crying and howling. We left in the morning with a complimentary breakfast, of course. I kept telling my family we should leave, but they wanted to get their money's worth since we paid for 2 days and wanted to stay for at least one and have breakfast. Yeah, because random loud knocks from bed, tables and doors aren't creepy enough. After 2 weeks, similar things started happening at home. They began with loud knocks on my wall behind my bed, then on my grandmother's wall in her room. The knocks were so loud they began to give us headaches. We checked with the neighbors, but they were out of town. We live in a large villa with intercoms in every room, and they started ringing on their own, around 3 a.m. or 3 p.m., oddly specific times, and when we'd pick up, no one would speak. At first, we thought someone in the house was pranking everyone else, so we gathered everyone in the living room on the ground floor, and the intercoms still rang. Even the men in the family, who at first refused to believe us, got visibly shaken when my uncle disconnected the intercom system by cutting the wires and it still rang. This really creeped my family out. One evening, the knocking became extremely loud. We all ran to my grandmother's room because she was clearly terrified. Later, 2 of my cousins claimed they saw shadows behind the curtains, though none of us could confirm that part. My aunt said she had a dream where a shadow-like figure that resembled a child asked her, "Why are you making such an effort to make me leave? I haven't bothered anyone." This went on for 2 months. Eventually, my family called a priest who gave us holy verses to tape to the walls. A few days later, one of the papers with holy verses outside my room was found upside down. The priest returned, walked around the house praying, and then told us to start calling my younger sister by a different name. I don't know why, but my family followed his instructions. Around the same time, my younger sister said she could hear the knocking even at school. We thought she was just scared and imagining things, until her teacher confirmed it. The teacher said they were in the school library when the loud knocking noises were heard. Staff thought someone was causing trouble and made the students line up, but the knocking continued, and they couldn't find the source. We did everything the priest asked, called my sister by a different name, no one slept by themselves, always in pairs, and no one was allowed to wear perfume. He came back in a few weeks later and had a long, thin stick in his hand. He slid it across the walls of our house and kept chanting holy verses. Over time, after following his instructions, the activity slowly reduced and then stopped completely. Nothing similar has happened since, and we still live in the same house today. I'm not someone who's easily scared or very into paranormal explanations, but whatever this was, it genuinely shook me and my entire family for months. About 10 years ago, I had a job that required me to travel a lot all over the state that I'm in. I've stayed in dozens of hotels, both in urban and rural settings, and I have two stories that stick out. The first story is when I was staying in a fairly new Drury Inn near a ski resort. Nothing was too remarkable about the stay, other than just feeling like something was wrong and I couldn't sleep. I only stayed there one night. Most of the night I laid there staring at the ceiling. I heard my truck keys slide across the desk from one side to the other multiple times. The table was around 10 inches from my bed, and obviously I was the only person staying in the room. It wasn't my first time being somewhere that had activity, so it didn't really scare me, but it did make it quite hard to sleep. I kept watching and waiting for something else to happen, but all that happened was the keys moving. In the morning, they definitely weren't where I'd placed them the night before. The second story, I was staying in the only hotel anywhere near where I was working. It was kind of a weird setup. It was a combination motel/drive-in movie theater. The place dates back to probably the 1950s. The gimmick of the place was that in addition to there being a drive-in on the property, you could also open a big picture window in the room and be able to see the drive-in screen. They would broadcast the movie audio to speakers in the room. It was kinda cool, but since it was so old, the viewing experience kinda sucked. So I watched maybe a few minutes of the movie, and then just shut the curtain and settled in for the night. Well, this was also considered the off-season for the area, and for the entire motel, I was the only vehicle parked in their lot, and all the other lights in every other room were off. I was truly the only guest in that building that night. I smoke, so I would pop outside to the parking lot every few hours to light up a cigarette. I did this until I went to bed at around 11. The entire time no one else showed up, and I was still alone. As soon as I laid down to go to sleep, it sounded like someone in the room above me, as I was on the ground floor, began moving all the furniture around the unit. I mean, it sounded like the refrigerator and appliances in the kitchen were sliding around all over. So I go out for another smoke and double-checked. No one else was around. I could see no lights. This went on for a few hours and then stopped. So I assumed that maybe maintenance were doing it, and that I didn't know which room I was in, and maybe they were doing work on the room above me. But it was definitely loud, and went on for long enough that I was convinced someone was moving something. When I went to check out the next morning and mentioned to the girl at the desk about maintenance being pretty loud the night before, she informed me that they didn't have anyone else on the property that night, and that I was the only tenant in the building I was in. So I explained to her what happened, and that maybe they had someone break into the room. Nope. She went and checked the room while I was getting ready to leave and nothing was out of place. I only stayed at that place once, but it definitely feels like that place was haunted. I live in South Wales, and there is a hotel, or rather there was, called Miskin Manor. It was a 4-star spa hotel that I once stayed in for a conference with work, and in the morning, I found out that it was allegedly haunted. Local stories spoke of a grey lady in the bar where there used to be a staircase, and some child-sized ghost there as well. Having had no such encounter, I looked into the place more a while later to confirm some legends and even saw some YouTube videos that are still up of ghost hunters. For a while, they had organized groups. Well, roll around 2022, and it came to my attention that the owners were struggling and it was impartial administration. For big hotels, this tends to trigger a fire sale on rooms, so I thought I would book one of their bigger suites as a treat, and saw that I could get the primary bridal suite, which is their biggest and best room, on Halloween night, so my wife and I could not resist. Here are the 3 experiences we had, after learning that the only people in the building that night were a group of ghost hunters at the other end of the mansion, and my wife and I, not even any staff. Late in the evening, we were watching some TV show, and I noticed the light come on under the door to the shared hall. The lights are motion activated, and surely enough, I saw a shadow walk past. The thing is, there were no rooms that way down the hall, just an alarmed fire exit, so I stared at the light under the door, waiting for someone to walk back, but no one did. As the light eventually went off, I jumped up and opened the door. The lights came back on, and no one was there. When we went to bed, I decided to place a chair and suitcase in front of the 2 glass doors between the bedroom and the next room in the suite, because it's in the country and pitch dark when the light is out, so I didn't want to walk into the door in the night if I needed to head to the bathroom. With that done, we went to bed and chatted for a while before we started to hear and feel tapping and scratching on the 4-poster bed. Convinced that the other person was having fun, we both raised our hands and feet above the covers and it stopped. For about a few seconds. Then the noise started again, and the bed shook. I got out and used the torch on my phone to look under the bed, and there was nothing there. No signs of rodents at all, and it was immaculately clean. It took us ages to find sleep after that, but eventually she and then I managed it. Of course, I had to go to the bathroom in the early hours, and sure enough, banged into the glass doors. Input on the light and suitcase and chairs were still both in the same spot, but the doors were closed. It was a fun night. I used to work the evening shift from 2 p.m. to 11:30 in a hotel in a population of over 100,000 people in Bavaria, Germany, which meant that typically 90% of all my tasks were to just check in guests. On this particular day, it was me and a female colleague that I'm still good friends with, and we both remembered this vividly. It was already late, probably around 6 p.m, so most of the check-ins were already done. There were only a few guests who we were waiting to arrive, and this meant that we were mostly just chatting to each other and not working. That's when a family of 3 arrives, mum, dad, and son. The thing is, all 3 pretty much looked like default caricatures. The dad was super tall and skinny and bald, and wore a massive backpack and sandals like a German tourist caricature. The mum was a short curvy blonde, like a typical Oktoberfest waitress, and the 7 to 8-year-old son looked like a default character in a video game. As soon as they entered the lobby, there was a tangible shift in the vibe for some reason. They all seemed so tense that me and my colleague also got tense and serious, despite us usually being chatty to our guests. So I checked them in. They didn't make a sound. I showed them where the elevators were, and they went in that direction, and as soon as they were around the corner, the tense feeling ebbed away. My colleague immediately whispered to me, "Damn, what was wrong with them?" I was thinking the same thing, but we forgot about them and moved on with our day. Then the next guest arrives. Bear in mind, this is at least 10 minutes later. Normal lady, we check her in. She asks us about restaurants in the city, and once again I show her where the elevator is. She goes there, and then we hear the elevator door open. She immediately says, "Oh, sorry," and we hear the doors close. I thought it was some cleaners going into the basement, as it's where the cleaning supplies were. But then the lady comes back to us and tells us there's a family in the elevator just standing and aren't going anywhere. Both me and my colleague were like, there's no way. So we walk up to the elevator, press the button, and sure enough it opens instantly. And it's the weird family. They're just standing there like mannequins, gazing ahead at nothing. Then after a few seconds, my colleague asks, "Are you okay?" And this reactivated them. Still super weird, but they start politely smiling, and the mum says first, "We are okay. Thank you for asking." The dad presses the button that takes them to their floor. Then we wait, call the elevator again, and the other lady also gets to her room. Me and my colleague then go back to the reception and look at each other like, what the hell's going on? Those caricature-looking NPC people were just standing in the elevator for more than 10 minutes. Even now, 4 years later, we both remember this story, and it's a thing that gets brought up by our friend group whenever we see someone behaving oddly. One of our friends said they might have zoned out from being tired, but this encounter was honestly too strange for my taste. I've always had a big interest in the paranormal, ghosts, and anything remotely strange. When I was in middle school around 7th or 8th grade, I convinced my parents that for summer vacation, we should go stay in a haunted hotel. I was fully invested at the time, so we ended up going to the Menja Hotel in San Antonio. On the first visit, I bought a video camera and filmed myself walking through the hotel with my dad and best friend. I didn't catch anything, but there were a few weird moments that stood out. Because while walking around, we heard a loud bang. When we turned a corner, we saw a girl whimpering, and after that, someone clearly said, "You get down." I've never been able to find that video again, which is frustrating because everything else in the hallway was dead quiet, which you'd probably expect from a hotel at that hour. My best friend and I were still really excited, so later that night we started running up and down the halls. At one point we heard people running above us on the 3rd floor. We got hyped up and rushed upstairs to see who was there. We did that twice, and both times there was no one above us. The second time a security guard actually came around, but we had already met this really chill woman who was taking photographs and she covered for us. That ended up turning into one of the most interesting conversations of the trip. She told me that both she and her daughter were mediums, and that every night a little boy would stand at the foot of her and her husband's bed. She was incredibly sweet about it, and I told her about what my friend and I had been experiencing as well. After that, I never saw her again for the rest of the trip. When we finally got home though, things didn't quite stop there. I went to my room and saw that one of the frames on my wall had fallen and shattered. Then the next morning, I woke up feeling a hand at the foot of my bed. It wasn't painful or forceful, but it was enough to wake me up and make me instantly aware of it. That started happening every morning around 10 a.m. I remember one time I woke up just before 10 and actually asked whatever it was not to wake me up that day, and it didn't. I started wondering if I was losing it because it sounded ridiculous even to me. But then one night my dog was sleeping in the bed with me, and the next morning he jolted awake right along with me, which made me feel a lot less crazy. It was never really creepy in the worst way though. That, at least, seemed to be the full extent of whatever followed me home from that trip. And then after I complained about it to my friend over the phone, it went away. I used to work at a resort deep in Algonquin Park. It's basically rustic living from the ultra-rich, and it was a half-hour drive to self-service and an hour drive to the nearest town, to give you an idea of just how isolated we all were. I finished my late shift at around midnight and was walking back to my cabin. The path was pretty dark, but then I noticed an elderly man walking by me on the trail, wearing suspenders and a plaid shirt. We were not allowed to speak to the guests unless they spoke to us first, so following protocol, I didn't say anything. After he passed, I turned around to make sure he was heading the right way towards the guest cabins, and he had straight up disappeared. There was nowhere for him to go except into the thick woods, and if he had done that, I would have heard it, not to mention still seen him. The woods were right there, and walking through that kind of brush makes plenty of noise. I found the whole thing very strange. Definitely some spooky shenanigans here. I work at a hotel at the front desk. The hotel isn't very old, so you normally wouldn't expect something strange to happen there. Sometimes I work the night shift, which means I'm completely alone. On my first night, when my colleague showed me how everything worked and what I needed to do, She told me that we have a resident ghost, and said the sliding door at the main entrance opens and closes by itself. As she was saying that, I witnessed the sliding door open and close by itself. But it wasn't just the main entrance. The sliding door in the garage also kept opening and closing at night. Not even the motion sensor picked up anything because the light in the garage never switched on. Still, I was kind of okay with it. I love spooky stuff and didn't have a bad feeling while that happened. But one thing did kind of freak me out. All of the other stuff you could have just said was the electronics. But one night I heard the elevator ding behind me. The elevator only makes that sound when someone on that floor presses the button. But as you can imagine, I was alone, and there was nobody else around. The elevator opened and closed, but it stayed at that same floor. I also took a look to see if someone was inside the elevator, but it was empty. On the same day, the light in the toilets goes on by itself. Those lights work with a presence detector, and those detectors are not sensitive at all. I can stand in front of them, and they need several seconds to turn the light on. So how on earth does the light go on in an empty room? Once, while going on my tour through the hotel, I kept my phone recording the entrance. When I played it back, I caught a voice, and a rather strange rattling sound. At first, I thought I must have been the one who made it, but you couldn't see anyone in that video, and if it was me, there should be someone in frame, but there wasn't. Something that also happens often is the light on the 4th floor going on and off the whole night. That's something I can see from the reception. I don't think guests are running around in the middle of the night, so... I also saw some shadows in the corner. I do have the night shift again this week. Perhaps there'll be more to share with you, or maybe finally I'll catch something good on video. I'll be sure to let you all know. My husband and I were having problems, and I went to stay at a hotel for the night and calm things down. Little did I know what I was in for. I got inside the room and instantly felt weird and off. There's no way to really describe it adequately, but I'll try. The very thing I was trying to escape from his behavior felt like they followed me there, but only in the form of this rolling smoke and intense sort of hate coming from it. What I mean is I was going about doing whatever in the room and kept seeing this smoke-type thing rolling just like smoke, but it radiated hate from it. Every time I saw it, I jumped and felt so uneasy. I asked to switch rooms thinking it was the room, and I switched rooms and the feeling went away a little bit. It was more than a feeling though. It was tangible smoke. Can someone please explain to me what happened? I am a healthcare professional with a natural sensitivity to spiritual energy, though I don't usually rely much on technical equipment. Last month, my girlfriend and I were watching American Horror Story and got the sudden bite to take a spontaneous weekend trip to explore the paranormal. We decided to book a room at the historic Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona. What followed was a series of intense, unexplainable events that left us completely shaken, and I'm looking for feedback from the community experienced on what happened to us. I was out of the country for work, and the hotel is known to be haunted, as it was an asylum before the building was repurposed. When in the rooms, you can definitely tell it was a hospital. Anyway, people have claimed things have occurred during their stay. Well, after a night of drunken partying, I retired for the night to my room. I was on a video chat with my girlfriend while in my room, and I spent the first part hammering away at a pizza that literally did the Lord's work by staving off a hangover. As the night went on, I went to sleep, lights on, and my girlfriend is still on the video call. The next morning I wake up and saw she had called me again after I went to sleep. Because of the time change, it was still a reasonable time to call her back. She answered and was relieved to hear my voice, which I thought was odd. She tells me that while I was asleep, she heard the door to my room open and close. I tried to reason with her and said, well, maybe it was the door to another room, as the walls tend to be thin. She was absolutely certain that it wasn't the case, because it was loud, as if it were close to me. She then stated that she heard someone walking around my room and heard them shuffling about. She also heard a voice mumbling to itself, although she couldn't make out what it was saying. Mind you, I'm passed out, but the camera's still facing me so she can still see me. She swore she was going to see someone pop into the screen behind me. She also hangs up and then she tries calling me back with no luck. She's aware of the hotel's history, but what she wasn't aware of is that my room was a few doors down from a room where most people have had their issues with paranormal activity. I would like to say this was my only unexplained run-in in this location. However, it was not. This particular hotel has two wings, one older than the other. I, personally, am not a fan of the older wing. Upon checking in and being given my room keys, I entered into the older wing and went to the 5th floor. I walked up and down the hall looking for my room and couldn't find it. It seemed like as soon as I got off the elevator, I could feel my key heating up in my hand. This made no sense as the key is made of plastic. I figured maybe I had the plastic key card in the right position and that it was hitting a pressure point in my hand causing the burning sensation, so I adjusted how I held the key. Once I got to the end of the hall, I changed the key to my other hand because the burning sensation wouldn't stop. And when I looked at my hand, it was red. When I put the key in my other hand, it too began heating up. I finally went back to the elevator and went to the front desk to ask how to get to my room. As soon as I got off the floor, the burning stopped immediately. I tried to reason with myself, maybe I was having an allergic reaction. But how would it explain why as soon as I got off the floor it stopped? Maybe I kept hitting the right spots in my hand to set off a pressure point. But why would my hand go red? Has this happened to anyone else? I found out the hotel my husband booked us is apparently haunted. It's the Marriott Syracuse downtown, and I had no idea until I started Googling places to eat nearby on the way here. I've always been fascinated by this kind of stuff, and have had some experiences when I was younger, mostly at my parents' house, but a few other places as well, so I was weirdly excited. This place is known for its lady in blue, who usually shows up in the ballroom on the 10th floor, though things like footsteps and doors opening and closing, and electronics turning off and on, have been reported throughout, mostly on the 11th floor. The front desk lady said she had a minor experience on the 6th floor, and then told me about a wilder guest experience on the same. Anyway, I went up to the ballroom floor to look around and snap some pictures. There aren't any guest rooms on that floor. I checked a few doors in the conference room. They were dark but open, so I walked in one and heard what I can only explain as the sound of a wide open yawn. I look over, and it's another door open to a completely inky black abyss of a room. That's when I got frightened and went back down to get my husband. We went back up and I took a few more pictures, which I refused to look at until I was back in the room, because I didn't want to freak myself out. Nothing felt malicious, just weird, and I did get a strong sense of perfume in the ballroom, followed by a very light chilly breeze that moved the bottom of my hair, and then the smell was gone. My husband thought he saw something that seemed spooky to him, but he's never had any sort of experience and refused to elaborate. Here in San Antonio, Texas, we have a hotel called the Emily Morgan Hotel. It's a beautiful Gothic hotel that used to be a hospital and then a medical arts building. The newer owners try to sway away from its past being a hotspot for encounters, but it still attracts those interested. I recently booked a room which used to be 1408, but got changed to 1409 after the movie came out. Naturally, the 14th floor is actually the 13th floor due to the superstition. So I was staying in possibly the most haunted room on the most haunted floor. The 14th floor used to be the surgical floor and the waiting area, so there are most likely some souls stuck there. While I didn't see or hear anything that would be verified, I did smell an interesting aroma. If you've ever been in an older hospital or a nursing home, there's that smell of high-grade cleaners and antiseptics. That's what I smelled. My girlfriend tried to dismiss it as a sign that they just cleaned a room, but this was distinctly a hospital smell, and only the hallway smelled like that. We went to other haunted floors and there was no smell. What do you think? Could I chalk it up as an interesting experience or put it to bed as just the smell of a cleaning agent? Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I certainly did. And if anyone has ever stayed in a haunted hotel or has another story to share, I would absolutely 100% love to hear it. Also, I would like to stress this out big time, but if you are a member or patron and have a birthday coming up between now and September, please let me know for your birthday shout out, because I'm trying to get lots of videos recorded in advance to spend the summer with my girls, and I don't want to disappoint anyone, basically. I would like to extend one final thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued and dedicated support of the channel. It really does mean a hell of a lot, so thank you guys. And if you would like your name in the end credits, a bunch of extra cool additional perks, feel free to follow the link over to Patreon to find out more. But that's it from me, guys. I'll see you again soon, and until next time, good night.